evening, and on behalf of the commissioners and staff, I'd like to welcome you to the April 26th, 2022 City of Roseville Public Utilities Commission meeting. The 7-member commission is responsible for studying and advising the City Council regarding all utilities owned or operated by the city, including electric, water, wastewater, and solid waste. The Public Utilities Commission advises the City Council regarding planning, rates, public information, cable television franchises, and other matters relating to such enterprises, and may also hear citizen complaints as to operation or rates. The Public Utilities Commission also advises the City Council regarding the activities of such joint power agencies as the city may be a member of, or which relate to such utility enterprises. At this time, I would like to ask that everyone please put your electronic devices on silent. All right, Chair Webb is excused from tonight's meeting. Lynn, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Bielski?
Here.
Commissioner DeMarchi?
Here.
Commissioner DeLacy?
Here.
Vice Chair Knox?
Here.
Commissioner Meisch?
Here.
Commissioner Granger?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner DeMarchi, will you please lead us in the national anthem, or the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Item 4 on the agenda is public comments. This item is for anyone who would like to address the commission on any item that is not on tonight's agenda. When addressing the commission, please state your first and last name for the record. Okay, no public comments. Moving on. Next item is item 5.1. It's the approval of minutes. On the agenda is the approval of the March 22nd, 2022 meeting minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Minutes approved. All right. Next on the agenda is requests and presentations. Item 6.1, Roseville Electric Utility Monthly Update, reported by Electric Utility Director Dan Beans, summarizing the monthly status of electric utility issues for information.
Thank you, and good evening, Vice Chair and Commissioners. So I'm going to give you a brief update. I wanted to start by showing you a few slides from the American Public Power Association Line Workers Rodeo that took place last month in Austin, Texas. It's an annual national event. It has many benefits for our line workers, including our apprentices. When the apprentices go, they actually compete by taking written tests, and then they do perform practical skill competitions. And this event helps us create a culture of safety and allows our crews to compete against the best in the nation. And as you can see here, on the next slide, our Roseville Journeyman team came away with 2 awards, and one of our apprentices came away with an award as well. And you'll notice 2 of the 3 awards were the Hurt Man Rescue event, which is where the goal is for someone on the ground to be able to get up on a pole and then safely lower an injured worker to the ground for medical care. And the target is around 4 to 6 minutes to be able to do that. And I believe our crews did it in under 2 minutes. And the next photo here is a photo taken with Joy Ditto, President and CEO of the American Public Power Association, where I also serve on the board. And then one last thing on this item is April 18th is National Line Workers Appreciation Day, and our very own 22-member team maintains almost 1,000 miles of power lines. And a little later, you're going to hear from Power Engineering Manager Chris Porter, who will provide a report of our reliability metrics, which are very, very, very good. On a less cheery note, global supply chain issues have begun to impact our ability to acquire material for development. Most urgently now is the delay in shipments of transformers, some we ordered several months ago. We've met with local developers, and we'll have a follow-up meeting this Thursday to go over a temporary process to fairly distribute transformers when they start arriving again. The costs for these transformers are increasing approximately 400%, and the lead time after you order is well over a year, and previously it used to be 3 months. And so we used to always plan out a year ahead. Now we're going to try to stock 2 years worth of inventory on these kind of items to try to make sure we're responsive to our developers. As you know, our community is growing quite fast. Another noteworthy item is a progress report on our new building at 116th Grad Street across the plaza. So we're moving in. The new building, referred to as a legacy building, it'll allow electric to have a one-stop shop for all utility customer needs. Currently, some services are located here at the Civic Center in the first floor, and others are at 2090 Hilltop Circle. So we're going to combine utility billing, public service counters to improve customer service, access, and efficiency. And in addition, there'll be a demonstration space for utility-focused programs, technology, and rebates. So beginning next week, the customer-facing teams of Roseville Electric will begin operating out of the new building. The customer payment counter or utility building will be on the first floor just across the square, as I mentioned. And the following week, May 10th, additional employees that are currently at the 2090 Hilltop Circle will also make the move, and that includes finance, AMI, customer solutions, key accounts, economic development, marketing, and communications. Overall, more than 60 employees will make the move over to during the 2-week period, occupying the first 2 floors. And then we're going to start planning the top floor 3 and 4 for the tenant improvements there. And we'll keep you posted as we make progress on that. That's all I had tonight, unless you had any questions for me.
Do any commissioners have questions for the staff at this time? All right. Is there anyone from the public who would like to come forward and address the commission on this item? All right, no public. Thank you for the updates, Dan. All right, moving on to item 6.2, Roseville Electric Reliability Overview. Presentation on Roseville Electric Reliability Overview by Electric Power Engineering Manager Chris Porter. Good.
Commissioners. All right, one item to note that we did add one additional slide to the slide deck that you received, so there'll be one slide at the end that you don't see in front of you. So next slide. So just briefly, we're going to go over what system reliability means, our metrics, and how we've been performing, and the kind of items that we do to mitigate unscheduled outages and to keep those good reliability numbers. Next slide. All right, so we'll start with just a definition. What does reliability mean? And for us, that means the ability of an electric power system to withstand various conditions while delivering safe and consistent electric service to customers. So we really rank ourselves based on 2 main factors in their industry standards. So these are used across the industry. The first one is what we call SAIFI, which is the System Average Interruption Frequency Index, and then we have SAIDI, which is the System Average Interruption Duration Index, and on the subsequent slides, I'll explain more what those mean. So SAIFI, basically all SAIFI is the average of all of our customers, how often they experience an outage. So for our customers, on average in 2021, if that metric moved forward, they would experience an outage once every 5.3 years. So here's a chart that kind of compares us to some of the local utilities. So we have SMUD, Reading, and a local PG&E area that has a similar mix of overhead and underground like we do, so it's a fair comparison. And as you can see, over the last 4 years, we've significantly performed better than the other utilities, where we're on average having an outage once every 5 years. You can see SMUD and PG&E have basically everybody experiences an outage once a year, and you have Reading at once every 2 years-ish. The other metric that we judge ourselves on is the amount of time it takes for us to return a customer to power. So that's what SAIDI is. For our customers in 2021, our average customer outage when they experienced one was 13 minutes long. Again, as you compare to the other utilities in the area, on average, over the last 4 years, we're in the 10 to 15 minute range. Everybody else is significantly higher. You have, Reading in the 45 minute to 60 minute range. SMUD is in last year they're about an hour, and they've kind of bounced back and forth between an hour and 45 minutes. And then you have PG&E at the high end at close to 2 hours.
Yeah, they're terrible.
So this chart breaks down what we experienced in 2021, what caused these outages. As you can see, the major cause of outages last year was equipment failures, so equipment being pad-mounted transformers, switches, even the elbows, and basically anything but the cable. And then the cable failures amounted for the majority of our outages last year. Just for a couple other key ones, the percentages don't show up there, but the next highest one is vehicles versus equipment, which was approximately 5%. Then you have foreign objects and animals at 3.5%, mylar balloons at about 2%, and then dig-ins at about just over 1%. All right, so what do we do to prevent these outages from occurring? We do routine maintenance on our substations and inspections. So we inspect all of our substations once a month. So we have 2 substation techs that go to each substation once a month to do a round of inspections. We also maintain all of our major substation equipment once every 6 years. We also do proactive replacement of aged cable. This mainly is for mainline cable, which is the main distribution trunks off of our substations. We focus there because the outage numbers there, you might have 1,000 or 2,000 customers on a feeder. So we like to proactively replace that as we have collect data and analyze it. So we collect data on the age of the cable that failed, the manufacturer, and we look for trends to see which cable is looking like it's having issues, and we proactively identify those sections and replace it. And we do the same thing with transformers and switches if we're noticing any specific areas of concern. Also, with the rest of the distribution equipment, we do routine inspections of that as well. Every piece of equipment in our system has to have a visual inspection once every 5 years. So we're continually inspecting our equipment to keep up with that. As you probably noticed, we proactively tree trim around town. We have very few outages that have to do with trees unless it was during a rainy windstorm and a tree fell across the line, because we can't really prevent a tree from falling on our line, but we do keep branches very clear of our lines. And then every year we do a summer preparedness plan. This is a comprehensive look at our entire system and what we need to do to prepare for summer. And I expect you're probably getting a presentation on that in June, is my guess. Next slide. So aside from the maintenance and activities we do to make sure we replace equipment before it fails, our system design in and of itself is very robust and helps us mitigate outages or the possibility of outages before they happen. So currently our split of underground versus overhead equipment is 85% underground. All new designs in this system have to be underground, except for our sub-transmission system, which is cost prohibitive to underground the 60 kV system. And that, the underground system is a lot more robust and much less prone to weather issues. We overbuild a lot of our stuff to make sure that we have plenty of capacity for future development. We don't just design for the one specific customer. We make sure that we holistically look at the system and design appropriately. And then, it really comes down to a customer experiencing a outage of any duration is really you'd have to have your transformer fail to be out for any extended period of time, because 99% of our system has some other form of backfeed. So it really just takes, this is the amount of time it takes us to identify the problem and isolate it and switch around it before almost all of our customers get back in power. So that makes it very good for as far as returning stuff to service and keeping the customer outage minutes down. And then on the supply side, we transmit power across the city at 60 kV. That system is extremely robust. We call it a network, so any one line goes out of service, there's no interruption to any customers. So that makes it reliable on the supply side to the substations. We have highly qualified staff. Our average response time last year was 24 minutes. So, our SCADA system will page out our dispatchers immediately when a system problem occurs, or as telephone calls start coming in from customers. So immediately they're dispatched, and concurrently a troubleshooter is also rolling as well. The dispatcher is the one that directs the activities of locating and isolating faults. And then they'll direct the troubleshooter once the troubleshooter is on site to go to the problem areas and try to identify the fault to get everybody back in power. And here's a slide that we added on the external grid challenges. So as you're probably familiar, this is the duct curve. The biggest challenge on the duct curve you can see on the right side of the graph is that, in this case, a 13,000 megawatt ramp in 3 hours, that I think can go up to 16 to 18,000 today. The belly of the curve is an issue, right? Because we have too much generation on the system, and you have to have an equal balance of load and generation to keep the frequency at 60 hertz. So that part can be somewhat easily mitigated by CAISO. They can call for large-scale grid solar systems to curtail to prevent overgeneration. And also EIM helps in that area as well, because we can trade with other WEC members to get the balance in check. The harder part to deal with is that steep ramp there. In order to ramp up that fast, you have to have resources that can respond to it. Typically, that's just going to be natural gas-fired power plants and those types of devices that have quick response times that are dispatchable. And we have to obviously do that as the sun starts coming down and the solar starts coming offline, and as people get home from work, the demand goes up. So that's the biggest challenge. And for Roseville, it's really a portfolio issue for us. So we try to diversify our portfolio as much as we can in order to accommodate that for ourselves. However, it's great if we do it and we look good, but if the rest of the grid is in the same situation and it can't accommodate, it's going to be a challenge for the system, the grid as a whole, because if we can't keep, like I said, if we can't keep the generation in balance with the load, we're going to have frequency excursions, which is going to trigger automatic systems across WEC. So we have under frequency load shedding that at some level would respond if the grid couldn't keep in balance between the generation and the load. And that would shed load automatically in order to save the system from falling apart and blacking out. So that's about all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions?
Want to go first?
Yeah, thanks. I know that CalISO had outages 2 years ago and was worried that they were going to have outages last year, and I assume that's really this ramping period that is of concern.
Yeah, I think the main issue last year wasn't just the ramping; it was the peak demand. In the last year, there was forest fires that took out 3/4 of the north-south flows on the California-Oregon intertie. So the 3 of the 4 500 kV lines were tripped offline during that event, which prevented access to all the stuff in the north.
So forest fires.
Yeah.
And you noted that this is a little out of date. It's got 13,000 maximum, but it's up to 16 or 18. So it's getting worse.
It's getting worse as more solar comes online and more natural gas and traditional power plants are decommissioned to meet state mandates for renewable energy goals, and there are coastal water issues as well for any power plants that cool from coastal waters.
So the reason I thought it was important to talk about this just a little bit was because you guys are doing the IRP and you're going out soliciting input from city customers is what they'd like to see, what's most important to them, and I'd like them to be aware of these risks as you do that, so that they're, it's hard for the public to give knowing input. They're going to say, well, what's important to me? If they've got a little bit of information, it helps them focus on things that really are important, I think. So anyway, thank you very much for including this.
Yep, no problem.
Along the same lines, are some of the new technologies like distributed generation, virtual power plants, things like that, I think are supposed to offset some of this. Are we looking at any of that stuff?
So those are the kind of discussions we'll have for the IRP, because that demand response is another, option. So that will be, considered, but somebody's got to invest those monies into those kind of things. But we are obviously continuing to improve the technology of our system and add distribution automation over time and all that. But it does take a serious investment to do that.
And then we're still going to be implementing the AMI system, time of use, things like that as well.
AMI, but no plans for time of use that I am aware of.
Okay. A few years out there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, back to the reliability. So great presentation. Thank you so much. My question, were these in line with city council targets and goals?
I don't know, does the city council have any specific targets?
City council
No.
doesn't have them, but we include targets in our quarterly business reports that go to, our reports go out publicly, so we do set targets for
Right.
safety and other financial and performance metrics. So there are targets, and they are included in our quarterly reporting in terms of our performance regarding these targets.
Okay.
Good question, yes.
Oh, and
It's no outages, right? So,
Yeah. Exactly.
right. So, I mean, so it almost appears we're doing great, right? So now my question is, would that actually hurt us if we were trying to go after funding for the infrastructure bill funds?
I don't think so. I don't think you have to have poor performance to try to get some of those infrastructure monies. You just have to show, like, trying to meet new climate goals and all that. I think you can make a really good case for the kind of investment, because a lot of to meet some of the climate things doesn't take a huge amount of money, and not every community has that just sitting around. So yeah, no, I don't think you have to let your system deteriorate to where it's falling apart and burning up before you invest in it and get those grants. So
'Cause I remember, I don't know what the number was, but they said, well, our electric infrastructure in this country it's a D or a C or something like that. And I thought, geez, it sounds like we're good. So I don't think any utility is going to say, yeah, we have a D system, so.
yeah, no, we have a great system, but we're in California, and California aspires to a, beyond physics system, and so it's going to cost some money to defy physics for sure.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I don't have any questions, but I did want to say that this was a great presentation.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris, for the overview.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, sorry. Is there anyone from the public that would like to come forward and address the commission? All right, thanks, Chris, for the overview.
No problem. Have a good night.
All right, item 6.3, Environmental Utilities Monthly Update. Report by Principal Engineer Brian Buchanan will summarize the monthly status of environmental utilities activities.
Good evening. So I have a water update here. It's the obviously it's focused on the drought, but so I, being the messenger, may not be able to answer too many questions. But I'm going to start with where we're at right now with Folsom Lake, with the recent storms. Coupled with reclamations managing releases to conserve water storage, Folsom Reservoir has gotten up to about average for this time of year. We anticipate that by June, the releases from Folsom will be used to manage the delta conditions as the other key reservoirs, specifically Shasta, remain in a critically low condition. And then on March 28th of this year, Governor Newsom issued an executive order, N-722, which in part takes the following actions, among others, upon adoption of emergency regulations by the State Water Resource Control Board no later than May 25th of this year. It's going to require urban water suppliers to submit preliminary annual water supply and demand assessments to the Water Resources Department of Water Resources by June 1st. Under the proposed emergency regulations, urban water suppliers must submit final annual water supply demand assessments by July 22nd unless the supplier relies on imported water from a state water project or Central Valley project. in which case the urban water supplier must submit its final assessment by July 1st or 14 days after receiving the final allocation, whichever is later. Sean Bigley gave me some complicated information to provide to you guys, so bear with me. So the second point from the executive order is to require urban water suppliers to implement a level 2 response action identified in their water shortage contingency plans by a date to be determined by the state board. Triggering level 2 occurs when approaching a water shortage level of up to 20%. The next point is to prohibit irrigation of non-functional turf in commercial, industrial, and institutional settings except as required to ensure health of trees and perennial non-turf plantings. The emergency regulation also require the State Water Board to define non-functional turf, which the order generally defines as ornamental or otherwise used for recreation purposes such as school fields, sports fields, and parks. The impacts to the city, it will be the early deadline for the annual water supply assessment will not. The early deadline for the annual water supply assessment will not have a significant impact, other than creating a tight compliance deadline and questionable benefits to the city or state as we resubmit. Sorry about that. So basically, we're having to resubmit our demand guidelines twice. And doing it the second time, Sean doesn't see a big benefit in that because basically nothing's going to change between June and July. So they're having urban water suppliers reiterate their effort in a very short window. And then the next point, the next impact to the city is the city of Roseville is already in compliance with level 2 response requirements, given that the city has already activated stage 2 drought action via the municipal code in August of 2021. The last point is the potential prohibition of non-functional turf could result in significant aesthetic issues in Roseville's commercial corridors that irrigate with potable water. And the local conservation benefit would be questionable at best. Early indications are that the state intends to enforce these provisions instead of local agencies, so the state enforcing it instead of agencies like Roseville. However, that will be determined definitively if and when the board, State Water Board, adopts the actual emergency resolutions. Sorry about that. I'm not a water guy, but do you have any questions that I could? I'm sure there's a bunch.
I'll start over here this time. Anyone have any questions?
What days do we water? That's my question. Seems like it keeps changing.
Right. I don't know that we're at watering days, and I can't. I don't know specifics. I'm a wastewater guy, but I don't know the specifics of a stage 2 drought. But I know that the city communicates that thoroughly. So when there is a restriction and a restriction to watering days, I would assume that that's communicated clearly and probably on the city's website.
Okay. I'm sorry to be flip, but Roseville does have a pretty robust underground water storage regeneration program, correct? And then we have wells that could kick in and water the commercial corridors, or no? Right.
So you're speaking about the ASR program.
Right.
So I don't want to speak out of turn for the water, but the ASR program is meant more for severe drought, severe dry and driest years, not necessarily just to make up a stage 2 type situation. But indeed, the city does have a very robust water supply portfolio. But in a situation where it's a curtailment, I don't think the ASR program is being used to fill in that gap, but more of a severe drought.
situation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It seems like there's a lot of concern for the commercial corridors if they cannot irrigate. My thought or question, similar to with residential properties where you have the cash for grass programs, converting grass and so forth to non-irrigated type landscaping or drought-resistant plants. Is that something that maybe Roseville could consider in that corridor with the business customers? I don't know if there's a similar program for
Right. I
commercial.
know what program you're talking about. Whether it extends to a commercial customers or not, I don't have that answer. We could look into that and definitely get back to you on that. But I know that focus was mainly on residential. Most commercial corridors are probably lighting in landscape districts, or a lot of them, and not all of them, but yeah, I don't know how that would work.
And then I got another one for you.
Okay.
Since your wastewater,
Uh-oh.
the recycled water, is it just not available in that area?
So the problem with recycled water is that it was built, the infrastructure was built in very specific areas, mostly the newer areas. And I'm going to give an overview of the wastewater utility, and it's going to include a little bit of recycled water. But I can talk about that. But some of the issues with recycled water is supply limitation, because we are, significantly taxing the supply. But it's also we don't have infrastructure on the other parts of town. So since the late 90s, we've only built it in the new developing areas of Roseville. So areas on the other side of Highway 80, we just don't have infrastructure over there. And it is exceedingly expensive to extend infrastructure like that. So,
Thanks.
So, thanks for the presentation, and I understand you're not the water guy, but so Folsom's at average for this time of year, because we've had a little bit of extra rain, and things are, so around here things are kind of normal. Well, not really. I mean, the snowpack is just still below normal, but there's plenty of snowpack for deliveries. The challenge is trying to explain to our customers that Folsom is really part of the federal system and the statewide system, and that water's actually committed to help the Delta and to support exports to Southern California. And so we're only going to get a 25% supply. And it's not 25% of our contract, it's 25% of what we've historically used, right? But the PCWA supply, I assume, is in fully available. And it, with the 25%, should meet 100% of the city's water supply needs this summer. So we actually have, I believe, 100% surface water supply to meet all of the city's water supply needs. And we're being asked to conserve 20% because the rest of the state is in pretty significant trouble because Shasta and Oroville are so low. We happen to be sort of in the heart of where the water comes, which is fortunate for us, but so we're sharing the pain along with everybody else, which is, and I think it's the right thing to do, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that we should be denuding our commercial landscape corridors because it's not necessary. We have the available water supply, and that's before we even begin to tap the groundwater that's available, because we have groundwater as well. So I think that we should do and encourage our customers to do what the state is asking, or at least on the mandated side, but voluntarily stepping forward. I think those directions are more aimed at Los Angeles, where they've got critical needs. Up here, where we actually have a full supply. And like I said, I'm in favor of doing our part to help the rest of the state, but I don't think that we should be stripping our landscape corridors. That makes sense to you? I mean, you're here to make the presentation.
Right. It does. And I think regardless of, like you said, where the state's at with with drought conditions overall. The city is in a good position in that, we have a very diversified water supply. But, the issue of ornamental turf, that's come up before, and I don't think the intent is to voluntarily strip ornamental turf from the city with, I think that would come via a directive or a regulation from the State Water Board. But yes, I definitely think the city is feeling the state's pain, here, and the city has done a great job in planning its water supply. But again, ornamental turf, I think, it's not going to be necessarily involuntary situation. I don't think we're going to take volunteer, maybe if you want to take one for the team. But I don't think I think after the last severe drought, I think the city has really curbed the amount of ornamental turf. You don't see it as much out there in the parts of town that are potable water irrigation. So I think those areas are starting to dwindle anyway.
Thank you.
I'm going to make a couple clarifications just for some of the information that Brian was talking about earlier on watering days. And Commissioner Bielski, you had a question on what days are we allowed to water. So I looked that up, and Monday and Friday are the residential days. So Mondays and Fridays. Non-residential is Mondays and Thursdays that you can water, but there's a change happening on the first day of May where that residential you can water Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then first day of May for non-residential, it's Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday for residential coming up in May. Monday, Thursday, Saturday coming up for non-residential. And then there are still watering restrictions of no irrigation during 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. So basically over the summertime through the end of August, you'll be able to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday watering as long as we remain in the stage 2 drought. If we move up to stage 3, it might be a little bit different.
And drip systems are still exempt. And then isn't there something that there's no watering after if rainfall has occurred in the last 24 hours, or?
That is it. It's at least 24 hours. I don't know if
Okay.
it's 24 or 48,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification.
That's all available on our website, and I just Googled Roseville watering days if anybody wants to look that up.
Does the state have any reward programs if, as a city, we get ahead and reduce our usage? Like, do they come back and give us any kind of special program? Yeah, I know. That was a dumb question. Answered. Thank you.
Not that I know of.
All right. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You touched on one thing briefly, and that was about not landscape districts, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, don't a lot of the new developments have bonds for landscaping and in those public areas? And so they're paying up front on their tax bill. So that's another potential issue where we really couldn't back off of, doing anything to curtail or even remove. Because I mean, I don't know. I've never been in a Melrose situation, but I know some of those bonds could be 10, 15-year bonds.
Right, and a lighting and landscape bond, I don't know how, they're all different, but I don't know how the assumptions in that bond, the initial initiation of that, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, they're all going to be different depending on the situation. But yeah, most of the new development is West Roseville. And like Brian had mentioned, all of that has purple pipe reclaimed water versus the east side of town that it's a little bit different. So where he was mentioning the kind of on the east side of town and the commercial properties with this stop watering non-functional turf, I mean, that could affect some of that area along Douglas Corridor or Roseville Parkway, some of that area that doesn't necessarily have the same lighting and landscape district or CFD or Melrose district. So it's more on the landscape maintenance as opposed to the watering side of things.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. At this time, is there anyone from the public who'd like to come up and ask address the commission on this item? All right, thanks for that part of it, Brian. And we'll move on now to your presentation on the wastewater utility.
All right. I real quick, I apologize. I had one more update, brief update, from the finance side of environmental utilities. We are starting a rates analysis that we do every 2 years. It's starting this summer. We'll be starting it this summer and starting public outreach probably early next year. So we do a 10-year look ahead, but we set rates for 2 years. So we'll be starting this new rates case here shortly.
When does that conclude and then be presented to like the commission?
It usually takes a few months to get a draft, and then we start doing public outreach. So we'll start public outreach early next year. So the initiation of the rate case will start this summer, run for probably throughout the rest of this year, and then we'll start public outreach soon after that.
That would be for 24 and 25.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on that? All right, Brian. So go ahead and we'll move on to the environmental utilities water waste portion of your presentation.
So I'm going to give you, it's going to be a brief overview. I probably could talk the whole meeting on any part of the utility, but just going to try to give you a brief overview of the utility and kind of what it's all about. I was going to start the presentation with a shock and awe photo. I know wastewater, we got lots of shock and awe, lots of gross pictures, lots of things that people don't want to see. This one, I was digging through our photos. This is a good one. This is the Dry Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant in the 70s, about 50 years ago, and it was the improvements done right after the Clean Water Act in 1972, and the Clean Water Act is really what defined where we're at right now with wastewater treatment. And if you look at this, it's hard to tell, but probably 75% of what you see in that picture is still in service today. So the significant longevity of those facilities. So I'll start with the parts. The parts of the wastewater utility. There's the treatment. The city owns 2 wastewater treatment plants. We have collections. The wastewater collections does exactly that. They collect and convey the wastewater to the plants. We have recycle water. And we have EU maintenance, and I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail. And then supporting all of them are our compliance group that helps with compliance across the board. So the wastewater treatment part is unique in the utilities within Roseville because we're a regional facility. We treat wastewater at 2 wastewater treatment plants, the Dry Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Pleasant Grove Wastewater Treatment Plant. We treat wastewater from all of Roseville, parts of Placer County, and most of Rockland through South Placer Municipal Utilities District. Last year, we treated about 6.5 billion gallons of wastewater. In treating that, we removed about 20 million pounds of waste. And in performing all that treatment, we do recover some resources. Recycle water is a big one, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Biosolids, that's the solid side of the treatment process. We dewater that, and from the Dry Creek plant, we land apply those biosolids for fertilizer for fodder crops. And in the near future, we'll be at the Pleasant Grove plant. We have an expansion project underway. We'll be producing the same Class B biosolids and doing the same thing with those biosolids. And in that same solids process, we produce digester gas, which is methane. And at the Dry Creek plant, we use that methane to generate electricity. We run a internal combustion engine driven generator. And at the Pleasant Grove plant, we should soon be producing methane, and we'll be compressing it and fueling a portion of the refuse fleet with that. So I mentioned that the 2 wastewater treatment plants are regional facilities. The facilities themselves and how they operate, they're owned and operated by the city, but the funding for the capacity is done through the South Placer Wastewater Authority, which is a joint powers authority between the city of Roseville, Placer County, and the South Placer Municipal Utilities District. This is the entity that collects the regional connection fees when a new customer is connected to the wastewater system. And this funding through the SPWA is specifically for capacity projects. We use it for funding the expansion of the plants to accommodate these new customers. The funding for things like rehab and operations is all done through rates. The funding for capacity is done through our connection fees. And the Pleasant Grove expansion project is an example of a project funded through the SPWA. So the next part of the wastewater utility is the wastewater collections group. And they do exactly that. They maintain the pipes and the manholes that collect and convey the wastewater to the plants from homes and businesses. The plant, the collections group, they maintain about 855 miles of pipe. And that's about the distance to Disneyland and back. So if you laid a pipe all the way to Disneyland and all the way back, our collections crew, they maintain that much pipe. And maintaining that pipe, we have 12,500 manholes, and the manholes are throughout the system to provide access to these pipes. And the manholes as well need to be maintained. So a significant amount of facilities maintained by the collections group. And then recycle water. So the city, in treating the wastewater, we treat it to a level called disinfected tertiary recycle water that is appropriate for using for irrigation of parks and golf courses. We started delivering recycled water in 1997 to the Wood Creek Golf Course. And since then, we've expanded the program, mostly in West Roseville, because that's where all the development has occurred. But now we have about 200 connections, and we serve nearly 4,000 acre-feet of recycled water a year, and it is growing quickly. So we serve recycled water inside the city, and we do serve a few customers outside the city. And in the future, we will be serving regional customers up to the north and west of the city. So mostly in the SPWA service area that I discussed of our regional partners. The next big group in the wastewater utility is our environmental utilities maintenance group. We don't call it the wastewater maintenance group because this maintenance group, they maintain the water treatment plant and water facilities as well. So they maintain, this one group maintains the city's 2 wastewater treatment plants and the city's water treatment plant, 20 wastewater lift stations, and these are mostly small neighborhood lift stations, 11 groundwater wells, and 3 potable water tanks, and the city's 2 recycled water pump stations. The maintenance group, they maintain just under 5,000 assets. So an asset is a specific piece of equipment that has maintenance associated or scheduled with it, and that's specifically maintained by the group. And the group that supports everybody in wastewater is our compliance group. The city has 2 ELAP certified labs, one at each of the city's wastewater treatment plants. ELAP is the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. It's a program within the State Water Board. And our 2 laboratories, they perform compliance testing as well as process testing. So when the all three plants are looking to get process feedback on how they're performing process-wise. The lab also performs all of those kinds of tests as well. We also, within that compliance group, we have an industrial pretreatment program, and this pretreatment program permits and oversees industrial discharges throughout the SBWA service area. So it's not just Roseville, but the entire area that, the entire sewer shed that sheds to the two wastewater treatment plants. So we oversee and permit entities outside of Roseville as well. So all of the majority of the permits that permit wastewater come through or are overseen by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The treatment plants, they operate under a MPDS permit, which is a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit. It's the permit that allows an entity to discharge to waters of the state, to a creek, to a waterway. The Recycle Water Program operates under a Master Reclamation Permit, which is a little different than an MPDS permit. And the collections group, they operate under what they call a WDR, or a waste discharge requirement, which is just a set of requirements on how you have to operate your collection system. With that, that was my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
Sure, I have a couple questions. Where does the waste that's removed, where does it go?
So so I know I talked about biosolids, so the solid stream. So I'll go quickly through the process. So when the waste comes in, we physically remove some of the waste. It just settles. Right. And it's just a physical process, and we take that part of the waste, that physical part of the waste, and we send it to a digester, a big tank. And then I'm going to add to that. So then we have a secondary process, and this secondary process is really the heart of the wastewater process, and it's where, when they say the biological process, it's where the microorganisms consume the waste, the ammonia, and what we call biological oxygen demand, or the fecal matter, the urine, everything that's in wastewater is consumed in that step. And at that end of that process, the waste has been consumed, and we actually only have the biological process. We only have the bugs. We only have the microorganisms, and we take a portion of them to control their population, and we send those to the digester. And that's how we control the processes, by how much, how big we let that population get. But the biological process and the physical waste that we collected in the beginning go to a digester, and it continues to process for about a month, 15 days to a month, in what we call anaerobic digestion. So we don't allow any oxygen in there, and it continues. Other microorganisms take over, and it continues to consume waste. And in that case, it actually consumes pathogens. It consumes a lot of the waste that we don't want to expose the public to. And then at the end of that period, it's deemed as Class B biosolids. And Class B biosolids are allowed to be land applied for fertilizer for fodder crops, for crops that are not edible crops for humans. And that's probably the most common disposal method in California of Class B biosolids, is land application for fodder crops.
Oh, interesting. Is there a portion, I was just imagining if there was non-bio type stuff that gets into the stream, such as remember when they used to put the plastic little particles in soaps and stuff?
Right, so there is a big discussion like microplastics. So there are waste products that are processed in traditional treatment plant processes. They don't remove. They've never been, it's not a process that has been designed to remove those kind of products. And that is a big focus. And indeed, they are in beauty care products and things like that. They seem to be everywhere. And so the focus right now in California isn't necessarily on how to remove them, but how to keep them from actually getting into the wastewater in the first place, which is, source control is probably going to be the best method of removal of a lot of chemicals and a lot of things that we can't remove in that waste treatment process. So.
Then another question, is our system in Roseville, are there storm runoff and the sewer systems separate systems?
Yes. So Roseville has a separate sewer and storm drain system. So we are a separated system. So what flows, the storm water and runoff, what flows into the gutter and into the storm drain, it goes to the creeks and to the waterways. And we collect, and we make a huge effort to keep the rainwater out of the wastewater.
Right.
So
I just asked because I'm very familiar with another nearby city where they have a combined system which causes backup into people's homes. So we should all be happy in Roseville that that's not happening for us. All right, one more last question. Can our plants support a full build out of Roseville, Rockland, and South Placer, or is there a limit to us?
Right, and that's a great question. So the SBWA service area that is defined in the city's master plan, both of the two plants are designed to, at build out, be able to accommodate all flows from that service area. We don't have capacity right now. We basically, the way it works is when we have a capacity, when we reach 80% of that capacity, we take the step, we start the process of an expansion of the plant. So we keep expanding the plant incrementally so that we stay ahead of it, stay ahead of growth, stay ahead of the development. But if we take a giant step and provide capacity now that we would need at build out, it would be an incredibly expensive step that we don't have funding for. So yes, it is designed to be able to accommodate build out flows for all of the city and the parts of Placer County that are included.
Well, thank you.
You said we were going to expand to provide further north and west some of the wastewater after it's been treated?
For the recycled water,
right.
Correct.
So does that have to be built out? Is there infrastructure in place to provide to that? Or?
Not completely. So in that we have regional partners, in the agreements with our regional partners, we agreed to supply recycled water to some of these urban growth areas that were outside the city. They will build infrastructure just like any other entity would build infrastructure to be able to serve their development. So we have planned some of the infrastructure inside the city so that they would just be connecting to. But yes, all of the infrastructure necessary to serve them would be built by the development.
And then the city would be able to maintain that cost through billing by providing?
Right. So the way it would work for outside the city customers, the city would provide recycled water at a wholesale rate. So we would wholesale to a third party. In the case of parts of Placer County, would probably be PCWA, might be CalAm in the areas to the south. But then we would provide for a wholesale rate that completely recouped our costs.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions up here? No?
Yeah, with 850 miles of sewer pipes, that's a lot. Of course, that's a lot of messy piping. And in the older sections of Roseville, where it's been there for a substantial amount of time, how often is that replaced? What's the lifespan of?
Right. So it depends on the pipe material. So we do have an extensive rehab program that's in place where we look at the age of the pipe and the type of the pipe, and we develop a score based on age, material, and whether or not we've had service issues with the pipe. And then we rank it, and then we annually do replace or line of a lot of the pipeline within Roseville. So we do actively replace and reline the pipe. But yeah, some pipe is 75, 80, upwards of 100 years old.
Sure. When you say you line the pipe, how do you?
So we have a lining program. It's called cured in place pipe, where it's interesting, where they blow a sock into the pipe. That's kind of a mesh sock.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's different ways you can put in. You could put steam into the pipe, where it actually pushes the lining out and cures it, so it's cured in place. And then we go through and we cut out the connections that go to that pipe. And then there's other ways where you can cure it with UV light and other things like that. But that's one way to rehab a pipe.
Interesting. I'm sure with newer technologies, newer pipe methodologies, it's much easier to maintain pipe than it was 80 years ago or 90 years ago.
But we do have pipe. We have a fair amount of pipe that is still in the ground, that is still in good shape. So, clay pipe has an amazing life. Yeah. So,
I know that, not quite a different subject, but dealing with natural gas pipelines in some other parts of the country, like Chicago area, they've had to degrade the available pressure you can utilize as the pipe gets older, up to the point where it's in ounces. I mean, it's very, very low pressure available to industry, and they have to make major changes.
Right, I can see that.
On the treated water side, conservation has had an interesting effect of extending the life of the capacity of the treatment plants that have been built. Are you seeing the same thing on the wastewater side?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing so when I look at treatment capacity, and when we start looking at the need to expand the capacity of the plants, if you look at when we have conservation measures in place, the actual amount of waste, what we call the pounds of BOD, the actual waste that is conveyed, that hasn't gone down. So that doesn't go down with conservation. The liquid portion, that conveys that waste, that does go down when there's conservation that occurs with drought. So some plants have a restriction on the hydraulic capacity, and some plants have a restriction on the treatment capacity of the actual waste. So in our case, we have pretty good hydraulic capacity because we don't have a combined system. But we have seen the actual pounds of waste have continued to grow for the last at least 20 years. And the one side note to that, or one caveat to that, is during the COVID initial COVID shutdown, when a lot of the restaurants were changing to not dining in the restaurant, we did see a drop in that pounds of waste being conveyed to the plants, but that has recovered since then.
So the BOD demand is constant and increasing.
Correct.
So no, we got to build what we got to build. So your plans for expansion have not, the timing of them hasn't changed.
Not dramatically, right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, one more. This is something I think of as a homeowner. I keep thinking about how we're being presented in this meeting through time, that we're going to have to reduce our food waste. It's going to have to go into the trash in a different stream eventually here. So my thought sometimes is, should we just put it down the garbage disposal and flush it into the wastewater system? It sounds like if it's organic, it's going to produce methane gas. It sounds like a positive, but should I be thinking of that?
That's an interesting discussion. So, like restaurants, they don't put the food waste down the disposal. They're not supposed to. Homes, a lot of people put that food waste down the disposal, and in my mind, if it's conveyed, to the plant, it gets treated. It gets treated with the process. It might not break down the same way, but there is a bigger bang for the buck if we were to get that and put it directly into a digester rather than have it come through the wastewater treatment plant process. So there is a benefit in diverting that, and at least purely from a wastewater treatment standpoint, having that come directly into the plant, into the solid stream, as opposed to coming through the overall plant process. There is a significant benefit in how the plant processes it. But
Okay, thank you.
All right. Is there anyone from the public who would like to come forward and address the commission on this item? All right. Thank you, Brian.
thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is board member, commissioner, and staff reports. Are there any reports from the staff? Questions or comments for the commission, from the commission? Does anyone have any items they would like to suggest for future meetings?
So I watched the staff, Rich Plecker, make a presentation on the Western Placer Waste Management System. I don't know if any of you saw that. And I thought it was very interesting, and I would appreciate a presentation on that here.
All right, anyone else? All right. We have a motion for adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.